February 9th, 1944. Northern France. 25,000 feet up, the world is a frozen sea of white. The sun hasn't risen yet, and the light that filters through the clouds looks like the inside of a dying storm, cold, metallic, endless. A single P-47 Thunderbolt cuts through that sky. Its wings are streaked with ice, its engine howling against the thin air. Inside the cockpit, Second Lieutenant James "Red" Forrester, 22 years old, grips the throttle so tight his knuckles are white under the gloves. His oxygen mask fogs with each breath. His fuel gauge trembles near empty. On the radio, voices are breaking up, panicked, overlapping. "Bandits! 11 o'clock high! Stay tight! Stay tight! Jesus, I can't see them!" Forrester's formation, what's left of it, is escorting B-17 bombers limping home from Frankfurt. They're deep in enemy territory, flying on fumes, trying to stay alive long enough to see the channel. Somewhere above the clouds, the Luftwaffe is waiting. He knows what's coming. This is the point where Thunderbolts vanish, torn apart in seconds by Germans who can see them, hear them, before they ever get a shot off. The altimeter ticks down. The static in his headset grows louder. Forrester's heartbeat drowns it out. He whispers, almost to himself, "Not today." He reaches down, fingers trembling, a twist on the mixture knob, a pull on the prop pitch lever. The roar of the big engine fades to a soft, uneven growl, like a tiger exhaling. In the clouds, the sound disappears, and so does he. What happens in the next 3 minutes, nobody believes at first, because up here, silence should have meant death. But for one mechanic-turned-pilot from Iowa, silence was about to change everything. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a monster, 8 tons of metal and fuel wrapped around a Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine that could tear the sky apart. It was fast, heavy, and built to survive hits that would shred anything else. But it had one fatal flaw. You could hear it coming from miles away. That deep-throated engine, the one pilots loved for its power, was also a curse. At high altitude, where sound carries differently, that roar was like a beacon in the fog. German pilots could hear Thunderbolts long before they saw them. They'd wait, engines idle, hidden in the clouds, listening. Then they'd pounce. Early 1944 was a bloodletting for the 56th Fighter Group. 22 aircraft lost in less than 6 weeks, some never found again. Lieutenant Ray Jenkins went down over the Ardennes after his squadron blundered straight into a formation of Messerschmitts. The last anyone heard from him was a burst of static and a scream on the radio. "They're on us." Then silence. Captain Fred Avery lasted 10 seconds longer. His plane was found weeks later, half buried in a French field. The farmer who found it said the air still smelled like burned oil and cordite. It wasn't bad flying. It wasn't cowardice. It was physics. Up here, sound moved faster than sight. The Germans learned to hunt with their ears. The Americans never stood a chance. Pilots wrote home about it, about the feeling of being betrayed by their own machines. One said, "We don't fight the Luftwaffe anymore. We fight our own noise." James Forrester had heard that noise all his life. Back home in Iowa, it was tractors, not planes. He could tell a worn bearing by the pitch of the whine, a cracked gasket by the change in rhythm. He wasn't born for war. He was born with hands that fixed things. When the war came, he joined the Army Air Forces, trained on engines, before they trained him to fly them. His instructors said he was steady, but not brilliant, a background guy. The kind of pilot who followed orders and stayed alive, usually. But by the winter of '44, Forrester had started to notice something nobody wanted to admit. The Thunderbolt wasn't just loud, it was predictably loud. Its signature hum never changed. No matter what altitude or throttle setting, it was the sound of death approaching. So he started thinking like a mechanic again. He spent hours after missions sitting beside his plane, engine panels open, just listening. He'd lean close enough to feel the heat radiating from the cylinders, his fingertips black with soot. He heard things others didn't, micro shifts in tone, vibrations running through the frame. To everyone else, it was just noise. To him, it was data. That's when he started to wonder, could you make the world's loudest fighter go quiet? He brought it up once in the mess hall. The table went silent, then erupted in laughter. You gonna sneak up on him in a goddamn thunder machine? Next he'll be putting mufflers on it. Even his squad leader shook his head. Don't touch that engine, Red. You mess with factory tuning, you're grounded. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Every mission, every ambush, every friend who didn't come back. It was the same pattern. They were dying loud. Forrester wasn't trying to be clever. He just wanted to bring his crew home. So one night in January, when the rain was coming down sideways over the English coast, he did something no manual ever mentioned. He broke the rules. The hangar at Boxted Airfield was half dark. The wind howled through the open door, rattling the metal sheets. A single work lamp cast a yellow cone of light on the silver curve of his Thunderbolt's nose. Forrester crouched beside the cowl, tools spread out on a tarp. A wrench in one hand, a screwdriver in the other. His gloves were soaked in oil. The smell of aviation fuel hung in the air, sharp, metallic, almost sweet. Next to him, Sergeant Miller, a ground mechanic, watched with folded arms. "You sure about this, Red?" "Not even a little," Forrester said, tightening a screw on the carburetor. He was changing the way the engine breathed, leaning out the fuel mix, adjusting the prop pitch just below standard, and tightening the magneto timing by a hair. To an untrained ear, those were minor tweaks. To an aircraft engine, it was heresy. He'd spent weeks reading vibration charts, listening during warm-ups, learning how sound waves bounced off the cowl. Tonight, he was trying to make that sound vanish into the slipstream. The idea was simple in theory. If the engine's resonance matched the frequency of the airflow, the sound could be masked, almost cancelled out. But in practice, it was madness. Miller stepped closer, whispering, "You'll melt the damn thing. Burn out the plugs." "Maybe," Forrester muttered, "but maybe the Krauts won't hear me coming." He turned the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught. It didn't roar, it purred. The noise was different, low, uneven, almost muffled. Miller stared. "That doesn't sound right." "Exactly," Forrester said. He pulled off his gloves. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from knowing what he'd just done. If command found out, he'd be grounded, maybe court-martialed. He didn't care, because tomorrow he'd fly with it, and either it would kill him or it would save him. Morning, February 9th, 1944, Boxted Airfield, England. The tarmac is slick with frost. Pilots shuffle toward their planes under a dim grey sky, helmets in hand, eyes red from lack of sleep. The air smells like cold oil and exhaust. Someone coughs. Someone else crosses himself. Forrester doesn't speak. He climbs into his P-47, nicknamed Lucky 13, though lately it hasn't felt lucky at all. He runs his hand over the control panel like a ritual. Magneto switches, prop pitch, throttle. His thumb brushes the worn metal where he filed off the serial stamp, so no inspector could trace the engine mods. "Red, you good?" crackles the radio. It's his wingman, Lieutenant Carter. Younger, louder, the kind of guy who jokes to keep from thinking about death. "Yeah," Forrester says. "Good as I'll ever be." Engines start one by one down the line, each a thunderclap in the morning mist. But when Forrester turns his key, his aircraft doesn't thunder, it hums. Miller, the mechanic, watches from the hangar. He hears the difference immediately. The others don't. They're too busy revving up, yelling, trying to cut through the noise. The formation takes off. 12 Thunderbolts climbing into the low clouds, their silver bellies swallowed by grey. An hour later, over northern France, the bomber formation ahead looks ragged, stretched thin. B-17s limping home from Frankfurt, wings riddled with holes, engines smoking. Forrester's group escorts from above, scanning the endless white. The radio is static and fear. "Eagle leader, I've lost visual. Keep altitude, watch your speed. Bogies at 12, Messerschmitts climbing." And then it starts. The sky erupts. Tracer fire rips through the fog. A Thunderbolt spins away, trailing flame. Another disintegrates without sound. Forrester feels his stomach drop. He pushes throttle, climbs, peers through the milky haze. Nothing. Just cloud. Then, a flicker of shadow, wings slicing past. The Germans are above them, unseen, diving in pairs. The same nightmare that killed Jenkins, Avery, half their squadron. "Carter, break right," he shouts. But Carter's already gone. His wingtip vanishes into smoke. Forrester's chest tightens. He hears the growl of a German engine circling behind him. He can't see it, but he feels it in the air. That high-pitched whine of a Bf-109 throttling for the kill. This is it. Everything he tried to change, everything he risked. This is the moment it matters. He pulls throttle back, twists the mixture knob. The roar fades to a low murmur. So soft he can hear the wind whisper through the canopy. The plane shudders. For a second he thinks the engine's dead. Then, nothing. No noise, no echo, no clue he's even there. Forrester holds his breath. His heart is pounding so hard it feels louder than the engine. The German passes above him, close enough that Forrester can see the yellow nose, the black cross, the pilot's head turning side to side, searching. The 109 banks, scanning the clouds. It doesn't see him, doesn't hear him. Forrester slides in behind the formation, silent as a ghost. He squeezes the trigger. The guns roar. The recoil kicks his shoulders. The Messerschmitt explodes. One bright flower of flame swallowed instantly by cloud. He doesn't think. He pulls up, slides behind the next one, fires again. Another kill. Another burst of light in the mist. The radio goes dead silent. Nobody knows who fired, where it came from. The Germans scatter, confused. One dives straight down, trying to escape a phantom. Forrester pulls out of the cloud layer, sweat running down his face despite the freezing air. His oxygen mask fogs, his hands shaking. He can't tell if he's alive or dreaming. Below him, the bombers keep flying. "This is Lucky 13, he says into the radio. 2 down, returning to escort. No one answers for a long time. Then a voice breaks through. "Red, where the hell did you come from?" He almost laughs. "Nowhere." Hours later, they land back at Boxted. The surviving pilots are silent as they climb down. Out of 12 Thunderbolts, only 7 returned. But for once, Forrester's plane isn't riddled with holes. Miller runs out to meet him. "How bad's she running?" Forrester grins weakly, pats the side of the engine cowling. "Hotter than hell, but quiet." The ground crew crowds around, inspecting, listening. The engine idles low, barely audible above the wind. It shouldn't work. Every man there knows it shouldn't work. Yet it did. That night, the hangar fills with whispers. Red says he vanished in the clouds. The jugs can't be that quiet. You sure he didn't just get lucky? Maybe he did. But pilots start asking questions. What did he change? How? What settings? Forrester doesn't answer. He just shrugs and says, "Listen to your engine. It'll tell you what it needs." But in truth, he knows what he did, and he knows it's dangerous. The mix runs lean. The engine overheats. One wrong move, and it could seize mid-air. Still, the idea spreads. Within a week, 2 other pilots are caught in the hangar at night, tinkering with carburetors, copying his setup. By the end of February, 5 Thunderbolts from the 56th are flying with modified tuning. No one reports it. Officially, it doesn't exist. By spring, Luftwaffe pilots start filing strange reports. Enemy fighters emerging from cloud cover without warning. No engine sound detected prior to attack. Invisible at approach. German radio chatter starts referring to the ghost jugs. Back at Boxted, mission survival rates climb. The same routes that used to cost 3 or 4 men now see entire formations return intact. The trick is spreading faster than anyone expected, through rumor, not orders. Pilots huddle around mess tables, drawing diagrams on napkins. Mechanics whisper during maintenance checks. Some even believe the Army's testing new silencers. They aren't. It's all Forrester. But he's paying for it. His engine runs hotter each mission. After 30 minutes in combat throttle, the temperature gauge climbs red. The smell of burnt oil fills the cockpit. Twice he almost stalls on landing. The squadron commander calls him in. "You've been modifying your power plant, haven't you?" "No, sir. Don't lie to me. I've seen the data logs. You run too lean. You're lucky you haven't burned a piston through the block." Forrester just stares at the floor. The commander sighs. "You keep doing this and you'll blow yourself out of the sky. You understand?" Forrester nods. But the next day he flies again. The same way. Because now he's seen what silence can do. May 3rd, 1944. Over Belgium. A bomber stream is returning from a raid on German rail lines.
Luftwaffe interceptors swarm them like hornets. Forrester's flight moves in. Clouds again. Visibility 0. He's flying Lucky 13, patched up and weary, the cockpit rattling from weeks of stress. His engine hums quietly beneath him, that same ghost-like tone. Suddenly, tracer fire slices through the clouds. The tail of his wingman's plane disappears in flame. Forrester rolls, dives, his own canopy shatters as bullets rake across it. He levels out barely 100 feet above the treetops. "Lucky 13, you hit?" someone calls over the radio. He doesn't answer. The engine sputters, coughing smoke. He flips the fuel selector, hits the primer. The plane jerks, then stabilizes. A Bf-109 bursts from the cloud above, diving straight at him. Forrester doesn't think. He cuts throttle completely. The plane goes silent, gliding. The German overshoots, too fast, too loud, too confident. Forrester flips the gun sight, fires a single burst. The Messerschmitt breaks apart in mid-air. But then the Thunderbolt coughs once, twice, and the engine dies, completely. Forrester coasts. The propeller stops spinning. The silence is absolute. He pulls the canopy latch and bails out just before the plane hits a Belgian field. Parachute open, wind howling. Below him, his Lucky 13 smashes into the earth, exploding in one last orange flash. He hits the ground hard. Pain blooms across his ribs, but he's alive. Somewhere behind him, smoke curls into the sky, the sound of nothing finally gone. For 3 days, nobody knew if Lieutenant Forrester was dead or captured. His squadron flew on without him, escorting bombers across the same grey skies he'd once turned into his hunting ground. But the stories kept spreading. They called it the Whisper. Pilots swapped the trick like a secret handshake. Tiny carburetor tweaks, magneto shifts, throttle discipline. No two planes were identical, but the idea was the same. Keep your engine in the dead zone, that narrow band where noise disappeared into the slipstream. By June, nearly a third of the 56th Fighter Group had adopted some version of it. None of it written down, none of it approved, but the results spoke for themselves. Before the spring, their losses on bomber escort averaged 3 Thunderbolts per mission. After the Whisper spread, it dropped to less than 1. Pilots started coming home with stories that sounded like science fiction. Captain Dale Tex Warren reported sneaking up behind 2 Fokker Wolves through cloud cover. "They never saw me. I was just there, like a ghost." Another said, "I fired before I even knew I'd lined him up. He didn't flinch. He couldn't hear me." For the Luftwaffe, it was a nightmare. Intercept reports filled with panic. Enemy fighters approach in total silence. Impossible to detect sound before attack. Advised new countermeasures. There were none. Physics had flipped sides. The Germans, who once owned the sky through stealth and speed, now faced Americans who could strike from nowhere. And back in England, Forrester's name was barely mentioned. He returned weeks later, ribs cracked, limping from a hard parachute landing. They found him wandering through a Belgian village, trading his flight gloves for bread. He was quiet, always had been. His commander asked, half joking, "You still running that science project of yours?" "No, sir," Forrester said. "The plane didn't make it." But the truth was, it didn't need to. The idea was already in the air, alive and moving faster than any report could stop it. When the war finally ended, the Thunderbolts went home before the men did. The Air Force moved on to jets, manuals rewritten, engines redesigned. The R-2800, that magnificent, thunderous beast, became museum glass, the noise it once made just a memory. And James "Red" Forrester went home to Iowa. He married the girl who'd written him letters all through the war, bought 40 acres of farmland, spent the rest of his life fixing engines, tractors, trucks, old farm pumps. He never bragged, never told neighbors he'd been a pilot, let alone that he'd changed the way men survived in the sky. When local kids asked if he'd ever flown one of those big warplanes, he'd just smile and say, "They're loud, louder than you'd think." But sometimes on quiet summer nights, his wife would find him sitting by the barn, listening to the wind through the corn, eyes closed, fingers drumming on his knee like a man counting propeller rotations. Maybe, in his head, he still heard that impossible sound, the moment a screaming engine went quiet and a man disappeared into the clouds. Years later, historians digging through maintenance logs noticed something strange. Engines from Forrester's old unit had unusual wear patterns, heat scoring around the carburetor inlet, magnetos tuned tighter than regulation. Mechanics back then hadn't documented the reason, they just marked field modification. But those marks lined up with the exact parameters Forrester described once, in a letter that was never mailed. They found it in a footlocker, yellow with age, after he died in 1981. In that letter, written to a fellow pilot he'd lost over France, he said, "If I ever see you again, I'll tell you how I made her quiet. Not to be clever, just to buy us a few more seconds. Sometimes, that's all a man needs." No signature, just his initials, JF. The silent engine trick never appeared in official records. No medal, no mention in after-action reports, no technical bulletins. History remembered the Thunderbolt's speed, its strength, not its whisper. But if you talk to the old pilots, the ones who flew out of Boxted or Kingsnorth or Halesworth, some still remember. They'll tell you about a rumor, a kid from Iowa who tuned his engine until the clouds swallowed him whole. They'll say,
"He was the first ghost we ever saw up there." And that's how wars really change, not in orders or speeches or medals, but in the quiet, desperate acts of men who refuse to die by the same rule twice. Forrester's silence outlived him. It became part of the air itself, a frequency of survival passed from one generation to the next. If you stand under the wing of a restored P-47 today, when the wind's just right, you can almost hear it. Not the roar, not the thunder, but the heartbeat underneath. History remembers the loud ones, the heroes, the aces, the men whose names echo through the decades. But sometimes, the war turned because one man stopped making noise. James Forrester didn't do it for glory. He did it because he couldn't stand hearing his friends die loud. And when you think about that, how silence itself became a weapon, maybe that's the part worth remembering. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed so these names don't disappear.